Hey, everybody, welcome to Keyword Crypto. This is Michael. I interviewed Luke P. from Decred, and his headphones went out, and I forgot that so we had to stop and then restart again, and I forgot that sometimes that can completely mess up anything recorded after that, and that's what happened. So, we got like a full hour and something in, but the last like 15 minutes got cut off. So I don't have that. So sorry, Luke. But everything else is good. So enjoy the show. What's been going on?
Not a whole bunch of stuff in the Decred ecosystem that we can talk about. A bunch of cool stuff, developments, but other than that, just working.
Are you full time on Decred?
Yes.
Nice. How long have you been that on full time for?
I joined the project in 2017 as just a part-time contributor, trying to figure out kind of where I'd fit in, and then 2018 is when I hopped to full time, and have been full time ever since.
And so they have something where like, now I did research, but at the same time, I don't want to like tell everybody. I'd rather have you tell people stuff, because I just feel like only two people in my audience have ever mentioned Decred before. So I'm just kind of coming at it from an assumption that most people don't know what it is. So cool. How are they paying you? I know there's like some kind of 10% dev fund or something like that.
Yeah, so we can kind of get into Decred's governance model a little bit more in depth, but the way I get paid is I get paid entirely in Decred. So we have a network treasury. 10% of every block reward gets set off to the side in the network treasury. And then the Decred stakeholders, people who own Decred and are locking it up staking, are the ones that actually control that treasury. So up until this point, the treasury has been a multi-sig controlled by the original team. And actually just this week, we had a hard fork vote. And then this gets really into the weeds of how the governance model works. So we should probably step back a little bit. But we have a hard fork vote that's decentralizing our treasury, where we're handing full control of the treasury over to the Decred stakeholders, right? So that at that point, my boss will technically be this anonymous group of Decred holders all over the world that will vote whether or not to approve the funding for my team's work.
Yeah, I just saw that scrolling through your feed yesterday. I was like, wow, that's a very trusting move on your guys' part.
Well, it's all. What do you mean by that?
Well, because if for whatever reason they're like, you know what, I didn't like Luke's tweet yesterday. Screw that guy. We're not paying him anymore. I'm going to vote not to pay him anymore, and I'm going to go on on a rampage and try to convince everybody else not to pay Luke.
Well, so if I was providing a value to the project, that would be against their own interest, right? Because the only people that are voting are the people that own Decred, and your influence is proportional to your stake. So it aligns incentives based on skin in the game. So as long as me and my team are providing value to the project, then I shouldn't have issues continuing to get funding. But it creates this competitive environment where, I'm based in the US, but I work with developers from all over the world. Most of the people I work with are in Latin America, South America. And so it creates this, you're competing on a global scale, right? So from a Decred holder perspective, I want as much competition as possible among all of like the best talent in the world. And the Decred model really attracts kind of the best talent in the world, because our governance model allows the protocol to adapt and evolve over time. So the things you can build are very, very cool. We're not nearly as constrained as some other projects like Bitcoin, where they don't allow hard fork votes. So it's a very interesting environment. It's this new type of protocol level DAO.
So if you're just listening now, I'm interviewing Luke Powell from Decred. I had a couple requests, fervent requests over the course of the last 6 months to interview somebody from Decred from a couple of my listeners. And I didn't know anything about Decred, and it's been on my radar since I got into crypto in 2017. But it's just, there's just so many different projects in there, and if I feel like it's kind of like almost high school, where you can go to high school for 4 years and be within 50 feet of a person and never actually interact with that person in 4 years, just
Right.
because your circle doesn't ever touch their circle. And I feel like
Right.
that's the one downside of cryptocurrency right now is I've been in it. I've been aware of it for 4 years, and I've never actually dug into it, just because my focus and attention has always been pulled somewhere else because of the circle I ran in, or just just on that one day when I was clicking through projects, Decred wasn't the one on the list at that point, and it's just like it's just such a random thing in this space.
Cool. Well, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, so I'm excited. So I guess when I'm on Decred, the website, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little like, okay, I've been in crypto for 4 years, and I still like my one issue with a lot of projects are like I don't understand what's going on in the first like 15 seconds, and then I start to like go like, okay, well, what are they actually doing? And somebody you work with sent me a ton of information. I went over it, and it's pretty amazing what you guys are doing. But I try to come at it from of like just my mom looking at a website for the first time. And
Right.
so tell
So
me
you kind of,
exactly what Decred is and what you guys are trying to accomplish.
yeah, you kind of hit on one of these kind of the issues that Decred has had in general. Is Decred is a very solid project from a fundamental perspective, and we'll get into what that means and why. But in the current crypto environment, right, it's very hard to keep up with projects that are very much marketing focused. That's not what Decred is focused on. And so a lot of times we slip by the wayside. But over time, what you'll see is that the code that Decred actually delivers, that's how you'll end up hearing about Decred. And so why don't we just start from the beginning? Like, why was Decred created? Who created it? All that good stuff, the origin story.
Perfect.
So Decred, just the very short answer to what Decred is it's a cryptocurrency that was launched by former Bitcoin developers that was built to address Bitcoin's biggest blind spot, which is governance. And we'll get into exactly what governance means because it's a very like abstract term for most people. And then in more recent years, Decred has also evolved to address Bitcoin's second biggest blind spot, which is privacy. So the long story is going back to the launch of Decred, right? It was this team of former Bitcoin developers. They built BTC Suite, which is the Golang Bitcoin implementation. That implementation is still maintained and used by Lightning Labs to build the Lightning Network out. And during that process, they were able to basically interact with Bitcoin community and saw firsthand how Bitcoin governance works. Now, with Bitcoin, right, there's no ability for the project to make decisions in a decentralized manner. For example, there's a new feature that somebody wants to propose to add to Bitcoin. Who gets to decide whether or not that feature gets added? If it's a hard fork change, is that hard fork change valid? And then also who pays for that work, right? So governance is essentially how a project makes decisions in a decentralized manner and how it pays for those decisions. Okay, so this was really what the block size war in Bitcoin was about. The block size war was this basically 3-year long internal struggle within the Bitcoin community that on the outside, the argument was over should Bitcoin scale on-chain or off-chain? Should it allow bigger blocks or should it move scaling to layer 2 solutions like the Lightning Network? But what the block size war was really about was who gets to make decisions about Bitcoin. And, it was this 3-long-year battle. At the end of it, the stance that the Bitcoin community essentially took is, okay, if we allow hard fork votes or hard fork changes, a hard fork is just a non-backwards compatible network upgrade, right? So you make some changes to the network and it forces full nodes to upgrade. Otherwise, they'll be forked off the network because they won't be running compatible software anymore. So the Bitcoin community said, there's no way to make these decisions in a decentralized manner. So we're just not going to have hard fork changes, right? And that the reason you don't want to allow hard fork changes in Bitcoin is because if there was some entity or some group of people being able to determine, what changes are valid and what are not, well, that offers a point of centralization that can then be used to attack Bitcoin, right? Like, who gets to determine what is valid and what is not? And so they went with this. They went with basically only soft fork changes, which are backwards compatible network upgrades. The
Well,
issue
wait
with
a minute.
that,
So, I mean, that statement that having the ability to hard fork creates a central point of failure.
it creates a central point of power,
Sorry,
right? Because
central point of power. But
yeah,
they just traded one central form of power for another one
what's the other
because,
one?
well, like how they have it right now, it's a small group of devs who make all the decisions, and they claim that anybody can help make changes to Bitcoin, but those changes have to be approved by somebody.
Right, and it even gets more complicated than that because the four main groups that you have all competing for power are the miners. The miners are the only ones with right access to the blockchain, right? So that's where they derive their power from. You have the developers. They derive their power from just the expertise in the field. They influence kind of community sentiment. Changes they say are valid will have a lot more pull with the community because of their perceived expertise. You have economic nodes. Those are basically businesses that run nodes, Coinbase, maybe institutional custody solutions, exchanges, but they don't necessarily hold the cryptocurrency, right? And they derive their power by essentially being the fiat on ramps and off ramps for a cryptocurrency. If all of the fiat on ramps were to say one thing, you'd have to consider that very seriously, because if they go one way and the project goes another way and you lose your fiat on ramps, then you lose all of your liquidity. And that's one of Bitcoin's main network effects right now.
Yeah.
And then the fourth group is the actual full nodes, right? And so this group has the least amount of leverage, because, in my opinion, because they don't have any recourse if they want to go against what the other three groups want, right? The miners have the ability to add or not add blocks to the blockchain. The developers have the ability to basically, continue maintaining code or make new changes. Economic nodes provide the liquidity. Well, the full nodes essentially are just the market, in air quotes. And the Bitcoin reasoning is that full nodes actually have influence over the network, because the market is subject to basically the participants of that market. Like, if full nodes wanted to go, in a opposite direction as the other groups, the market would be forced to follow the full nodes. But I just don't think that as Bitcoin grows and grows and grows, that holds as much weight as it used to, right? You have all of these competing forces. You have, corporate treasuries now holding Bitcoin. Eventually you'll have nation states holding Bitcoin. And if there is some change that these, corporate treasuries and nation states don't want, then, they're not going to just sit by and let Bitcoin, add privacy or something like that. That's just pulling something out of my hat, right?
Yeah.
They're going to get involved. And the block size war was this 3-year battle that almost tore the Bitcoin ecosystem apart. And that was when Bitcoin was, a $1 billion to $10 billion asset, right? Imagine the type of conflict that would emerge if a similar situation happens when Bitcoin is a multi-trillion-dollar asset, right? The scale of conflict is just much bigger, and the probability that it rips the community apart and fractures Bitcoin as a project is much greater, right? So it's this whole issue of, how does a project make decisions in a decentralized manner? And that is what Decred set out to solve. And it does that by a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake consensus mechanism, meaning we still rely on proof of work, just like Bitcoin does for the underlying security of the network, but there's a proof of stake layer added on top that allows for network governance. So all of the power in Decred resides with the people who own Decred and are staking that Decred. That is where all the decision-making authority resides. And that propagates itself in a couple different ways. We have hard fork changes. We have they dictate how the treasury gets spent, things like that. We can dive more into like the details, but from a very high level, that is the issue that Decred set out to solve, is basically an iteration of Bitcoin with the ability to adapt and evolve over time.
So essentially, you guys are just trying to be money.
Yes, it is. It is a this is very cliche to say, which is why I hate saying it, but it was built to be a better version of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So most altcoins they differentiate themselves from Bitcoin with by some technical decision, right? Bitcoin Cash said we're scaling on chain versus layer two. Ethereum said we don't like Bitcoin's limited scripting language. We want a Turing complete scripting language, and then we also want to put all that data on chain, right? It's these technical design decisions. Decred, on the other hand, takes the opposite approach. Like the Bitcoin developers, from a technical standpoint, they knew what they were doing. They made all of these decisions and trade-offs for very good reasons. The only thing that they kind of like, this is why I call it a blind spot, that they couldn't really foresee, is this issue, this social issue of governance. How does the protocol adapt and change over time? And there's even posts, going back to Satoshi, who says, if SHA-256 or when SHA-256 breaks one day, because it will break, I think that we as a community will just be able to come together and make a decision. And right, like that made sense back in the day. But now when you think about, nation state politics, all these massive corporations holding Bitcoin, it's not going to play out like that. It's not practical. And so
it's going to be like the UN trying to make a decision.
Exactly. Like it's just not practical. And so you need to hand control, you need to have all the power in the hands of the people who are exposed to the risk, right? That's what Decred is about, aligning incentives based on skin in the game. The people who own the Decred and are locking it up, staking it, locking it up for a random period of time, up to 4 months, are the ones that get to make all of the decisions about Decred. So they validate proof of work blocks, right? So if proof of work miners try and act up, the stakeholders can restrict their block reward. So if they're doing something if the proof of work miners are doing something that the proof of stake miners consider malicious, and this could be something as simple as refusing to upgrade their software, then the stakeholders can withhold the block reward from those proof of work miners, and they're essentially just wasting those computational resources. And then, like I said before, the stakeholders also control how that network treasury is allocated. So all of the power resides in the Decred stakeholders' hands.
So, but and I'm not, none of these. So anybody listening, and I told your coworker this. I'm not going to say her name just in case. I'm not sure if she wants her name out there. That like these, I'm not going to do any gotcha questions, but I am going to like kind of push back and dig a little bit. Like, what stops it? When you pitch me, when you give me the pitch, it almost it sounds like you're giving me the best case scenario.
Well, let me just stop you there.
I'm thinking about it from like worst case scenario of like,
let's go with the gotcha questions, because that's the only way that you're really going to dig down and understand how things work. Because
well, no, I just want you like, I'm not coming at it from a place of I don't believe in Decred and I'm trying to just like.
You should be coming from that place, though. There's so much BS in this ecosystem.
Well, no, I come at it from a place of like interest. Like I'm interested in technology. So, but I am gonna talk about things that are like make me think like, well, that could possibly not work. But I'm not coming at it for like, fuck Decred, blah blah, Nano for life or Litecoin for life, or it's just like I don't like that kind of stuff. But I'm not coming at it from a place of like I don't believe it can work. But what like it does sound you're coming at like when you're pitching it, it sounds great, but it's also like, borderline Pollyanna in the sense of like, oh, everyone's gonna have an opportunity to vote, and Bitcoin has to worry about nation states and Wall Street. But it's like, well, what if Wall Street buys up 20% of supply of Decred, and what if North Korea buys up 20% supply, and then all of a sudden, you're in that UN Security Council situation where Russia's the lone person because you have to get consensus, and Russia's like, fuck you, America. I'm going to let, the world implode because we don't like you. And we're going to veto, we're going to be that one veto vote. And so nothing good can change. So like, what stops Decred from that kind of situation where you have malicious actors who don't necessarily care about money? Sometimes they'll be more than happy to spend a bunch of money just to fuck over somebody else.
Right. Okay. So basically they buy up a large stake and then use that stake to nuke the network somehow. That's the same argument as basically nation states buying up proof of work miners and then using that to nuke the network somehow, right?
So kind of. I mean, proof of work would be not only are you buying all the infrastructure, but then you're spending a consistent amount of money over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. But if somebody just bought a bunch of Decred and staked it and said, you know what, we're going to do a $10 billion attack on the US just as an experiment. So they'd buy $10 billion worth of Decred or whatever the number is, stake that, and then have a large voting weight at that point.
So a large voting weight for what? What are they trying to pass? So there's two different types of votes in Decred. There is consensus votes, which are hard fork changes, and those are on-chain votes. So it's actually recorded on the Decred blockchain, and we do that. We only put data on the blockchain that absolutely needs to be on the blockchain. We want to prevent blockchain bloat as much as possible. So on-chain votes, hard fork votes are stored on the Decred blockchain. And the way it works is that you need a 75% supermajority in order to activate a hard fork vote. Because even though we want to be able to adapt and evolve over time, hard fork changes should still be very difficult to get through. They need to make a lot of sense in order for them to get passed, right? So if you're talking about buying up enough tickets to initiate a hard fork vote, well, you're basically having to buy up, the vast majority of the network, which is just not feasible. I mean, if you did do that, there's much more capital efficient ways to attack Decred than rocketing up the price by trying to buy up 75% of the supply. Imagine somebody tries to buy up 75% of Bitcoin or something like that. Like the price would absolutely just go to astronomical levels. I don't think it'd be a very practical thing. And then there's also votes that are not as stringent, which is more Treasury allocation votes. So those require 60% approval from the Decred stakeholders. But really, any way you slice it is that you still need a very large part of the network or part of the total circulating supply in order to be able to throw a vote in any one direction. And I don't think that that's really practical, especially as Decred continues to grow. It just won't be practical for any one entity to be able to buy up that much of the circulating supply without, doing just unheard of things to the price. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but okay, so if you haven't had a chance to watch Q Into the Storm, the documentary on HBO, I highly suggest you do it. Because it shows how just a small group of people can spend a couple of years slowly influencing things, and then all of a sudden having the ear of the president and pretty much 50% of the voting population in the U.S. It's scary how easily they were able to do it.
But
just through a couple of anonymous posters. So I guess my question
but you got to think like. Okay, just when you're thinking about...
but really fast. Let's say North Korea wants to try to take over Decred or Syria or something like that. Or I don't like picking countries under the guise that they're quote unquote bad. But let's say a bad actor state. And Russia did this with voting and with their troll farms and stuff like that. So it's not highly out. It's not like way out there. But it's pretty easy to influence people subtly. And so if they bought enough, let's say they bought like 20% and then slowly started disseminating misinformation over the course of like 3 or 4 years to get to the point where they have 60% voting weight. And then they could slowly start voting for their own coders. This is all so you have to play the long game. So it's and so they start getting all of their coders to be the ones being paid. And then at that point, you have a lot of control. If your coders are the ones, if your team is the one, and they don't even have to be from your state. It's just the ones that you have secretly working for you under the table or something like that. It's just
okay. Well, I think you're dramatically oversimplifying this. You're taking a very so. What you're talking about is basically... If it did just happen
to America, I would say you're right. But it literally just happened over the last 5 years here. So that's why it definitely is the forefront of my mind.
Right. But what you're talking about is... No, I totally get where you're coming from. But what you're talking about is basically a social attack providing a lot of leverage. A nation state with a small, with a just small allocation of capital can employ people to perform this social attack. And it has a ton of leverage. And that's absolutely valid. But you're thinking about it in the context of democracy, where it's one person, one vote, and not stake-weighted voting. So you should think about it more in the context: would a nation state be able to do this to a company? Could a nation state come in and perform the same games as to the equity of a company as it could to a democracy or just a form of government where you're governing people instead of trying to use governance as a value creation enterprise. And what you find is that the reason that stakeholder voting is more resistant to these types of attacks is because the more skin in the game you have, the more you're incentivized to make sure that you're voting for things that ensure a positive outcome, right? The large whales are going to not be able to be manipulated nearly as easily as somebody in a democracy with one person, one vote, right? It's all politics, and you really have to separate governance of a system that is meant to govern a society, essentially allowing people to live amongst one another without killing each other, and then governance of a value creation enterprise where the governance is used to facilitate coordination among people in order to create value in the world. Like, this is what LLCs and companies are. And so yes, nation states could absolutely attack Decred, but getting up to the level of stakeholder weight that you're talking about, 60% of the circulating supply, that's just, it's not feasible. It's not going to happen. Like, it would be so incredibly noticeable from a market perspective that I think it's very highly improbable. And that's not the things that are really dangerous to cryptocurrencies. The things that are dangerous to cryptocurrencies are, let's just look at Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is on this trajectory to, the government they weren't able to implement privacy soon enough in Bitcoin's history for it to take hold. And so now what you have is this completely transparent ledger that the government is essentially trying to make everything KYC, and non-KYC Bitcoins then become toxic, right? And then if you do that, you can leverage attacks similar to what they did with gold in the 30s, where you just, with a stroke of a regulatory pen, say you have to turn all of your gold in at this price, right? Those are more of the attacks that would cause a lot of damage to a cryptocurrency, as opposed to a nation state outright trying to, buy Decred on the market or bid up, mining hardware and things like that. Do you disagree with that?
As opposed to disagree, my rebuttal would be China slowly was able to accumulate over 60% hash power in Bitcoin. And now they're up to like 65% at any given time. Now, granted, a lot of that is from individual miners who point their miner to a pool in China. So that could change a little bit. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of mining, not vast majority, the majority of actual mining is in China. So that kind of consolidation of power isn't out of the realm of possibility, because we've seen it with the largest cryptocurrency in the world. And then my second rebuttal is, it sounds like you're thinking that rich people are rational and think like we do. And I'm just going to assume that you're not rich. I'm going to come at this from the place that you're rational like I am, and that you're not like one of those rich people like Jeff Bezos, who continually does irrational things to make more money at the expense of humanity. He has his employees pooping in bottles and shitting in bags. And any rational person would say, why would a business person do that? That's bad for business. And yet his business keeps on growing and he keeps making more and more money.
Okay,
and then you have people like Walmart, who the majority of their, I don't know if it's the majority, a large percent of their employees are so underpaid that they're on food stamps paid for by the US taxpayer. And then the people who own Walmart make out like bandits, because they're like, we just won't pay our employees. We'll let the taxpayer pay them. And it's just like, it seems totally irrational, but they're doing it because they're actually making more money. And they're making these really awful decisions for the community, but it personally helps them. So I could absolutely see maybe like 100 individuals, like 100 whales coming together and say, hey, we'll figure out ways to make it beneficial for us as the whale holders, because like Bitcoin's a perfect example. Like none of the decisions they've made over the last 5 years are rational, right? High fees, just small blocks, really slow. All these changes that like would make it more usable, and any rational person would be like, why you're voting to make it less usable? And so instead of trying to convince people that that's a good thing, they just, or like they shouldn't do that. They say, hey, no. The new narrative is store of value. And just by holding it, you're actually using it. I shit you not. People have said it to me on Twitter. They said, "Oh, I don't send. I use Bitcoin by holding it," and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But that's the new narrative. So they changed the narrative to try to convince you, and it's actually worked. If you go on Twitter, the vast majority of people now say Bitcoin is a store of value. It is not meant to be used as peer-to-peer currency.
Okay, you just broke off into like 10 different branches there. So let's tackle let's tackle these one at a time. Let's start with the miner centralization, right? Because of hardware manufacturing and the economies of scale you get with hardware manufacturing, you're always proof of work mining is a centralizing force, right? You're going to have dominant proof of work miners. Like this is a big issue in Bitcoin. And this is one of the reasons that Decred's hybrid model, this is where it really shines, because you still have proof of work miners mining blocks, and we're still relying on the security guarantees that proof of work provides, but the proof of stake layer is the one that validates those proof of work blocks. They check it and say, is this block valid, right? So it's the Decred stakeholders who ultimately decide what get added to the chain. So we don't have to worry about miner centralization as much because the stakeholders have control over what gets added to the chain, so they can keep malicious miners in check.
Okay, really fast. So I don't want to interrupt, but I wasn't using that as something that you need to worry about. I was saying that's an example of something happening in a different ecosystem to show you that stuff like that is possible.
It's possible because of the context of hardware manufacturing, right? Okay. If we're talking about centralization in some other context, like you got to evaluate in a very context specific scenario, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so that's my first point. Like Decred embraces ASICs because you're not fighting ASICs is really just it's an uphill battle that you're not going to win. ASICs actually make the network more secure as long as the mining centralization is not a threat. And that's what the hybrid model helps ensure. It's a check and balance, essentially. A two-factor proof of stake provides a two-factor authentication for the proof of work. So that would be my rebuttal to your first point. All right, now the second point is kind of long and meandering. Let's recap. What was your second rebuttal?
The second rebuttal is rich people don't seem rational to average people.
Okay.
So you and I may say that's totally irrational, but they're doing it because they're making more money.
The point, though, rational to who? And the point is aligning incentives via skin in the game. Somebody with skin in the game is going to make better decisions when because they're risking something, right? They're going to make on a general, just top level layer view. The best way to ensure good decisions are made is that you align incentives via skin in the game. This is why, LLCs and corporations, this is why we use these structures in order to incentivize value creation, in order to incentivize, it's basically the foundation that capitalism is built on. And if you can give me an example of a system that creates better outcomes than decision-making allocated based on skin in the game, then I'll be open to this conversation. But it's not a perfect system because no system is perfect, but it's the best way to ensure positive outcomes.
So you're saying that the American system of capitalism is better than the European system of capitalism?
I'm not talking about like specific nation state levels of capitalism, because at the end of the day, if the money that's underpinning capitalism is fiat based, is not actually subject to market forces, then you kind of have corrupted the whole idea of capitalism. But what I am saying is that aligning incentives via skin in the game will create the best outcomes long term.
Yeah, but we know that that's not the case. I mean, if you just have to look at it, you just have to look at America.
Disagree.
Well, I mean, so just take America as a perfect example. So we have a system that so you've laid out that system of LLCs and corporations in this, and then what we have is rich people who completely distort that, create off shell companies, shell corporations, offshore bank accounts, this and that, and they completely distort the process and have destroyed more or less the infrastructure of this country by manipulating those things. And it doesn't seem
Capitalist
rational to us because they live in this country. Why would you do something that destroys the place you live but they're not rational? So that's
what
my
you're
point
talking
is
a lot of what you're talking about is basically regulatory capture, basically companies or individuals using the government to grant themselves monopolies or offload risk, allow them to take risk without having skin in the game, just like the banks did in 2008. They were allowed to take huge amounts of risk, and then when the time came to pay for that risk, they offloaded it to the government. That's what you're talking about.
no, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about something
you're
like Apple having an LLC in Ireland instead of the US, so they don't have to pay any taxes in the US.
Okay, what you're talking about is a rant against capitalism in general, which we're not going to agree on.
Hold on. So,
you're okay.
How about this? Ask me if that's what I think versus telling me what I think, because I don't want to keep saying no. That's
well,
not.
you're going on all
right.
these basically just rants that have nothing to do with cryptocurrencies. Essentially, you're trying to draw conclusions about complex human systems and then apply them to like what I'm talking about with
you
Decred,
literally gave examples of LLCs and corporations. I'm just using the examples you just gave me.
Okay, we're not going to agree on this point. Like, if you don't think that aligning incentives via skin in the game produces the best outcomes, then we're not going to agree, and there's no point in talking about it. We have a fundamental different.
That's the thing. Like, if I'm giving you an example of that not working, and you saying, well, we're just not going to agree, that's fine. But if you're saying no, you're wrong, and I'm saying, because here are examples of it.
You're using. Okay, let's dive in. What is this? What is one specific example that you want to talk about?
I'm talking about. I'm just rebutting what you said. You're saying LLC people, corporations, they have skin in the game, and I'm saying here's a perfect example in the real world. Just using the country we both live in, of people taking that thing that you and I, as rational people, would say that's not a rational thing to do, but they're doing it despite hurting themselves, despite hurting their family, despite making the place they live kind of a worse place by not paying taxes and not, they have skin in the game because they live here. So you would think, why would you destroy the infrastructure of the thing you live in? But they're not rational actors. They just want to make more money, and they don't care if the money is stored out of the country and is helping other countries as long as they have that extra money.
You're trying to determine whether something is rational behavior for something that you don't know the details about the decision. And not only that, but you're basically saying that, okay, capitalism is the vehicle that has created the prosperity of the world today. The world exists. You get to live with modern indoor plumbing and heating and air conditioning, and you get to live in the equivalence of what a king could dream about, 1,000 years ago, because of capitalism incentivizing value creation in the world. Because that value creation was incentivized by skin in the game. People who create value in the world get to capture a portion of that value for themselves, right? That is the whole concept of capitalism, just allowing the free trade and transactions among two people. And then you're nitpicking these very specific situations where there might be regulatory capture, or there might be all these external factors that play in order to try and prove a point that it's. I don't agree with.
I don't think I'm nitpicking. We're you and I are both living in a perfect example of how easy it is to manipulate and take advantage of the system and destroy the infrastructure of the project that is America. Right. So America is kind of like a decentralized system. We have all these different ways of checks, of protecting people through checks and balances. So it's not just one top down decision making process. And so that's, I mean, I understand. I'm not saying, so what I'm saying is, like, I don't disagree with the concept that you're pitching me. I'm saying, how are you protecting it from the way that America itself has been, kind of destroyed through manipulation for the sole purpose of money, not necessarily for power in the country?
I disagree that the lessons that you're trying to take away from America's situation are, one, accurate in the first place, and two, applicable to cryptocurrencies.
What part do you think is inaccurate that I'm saying?
I think you're making very broad generalizations about things that are just complex situations, very circumstantial, and just
give me an example. Give me an example. So
everything you just said, that basically that America is this spoiled system because of a
Where did I
small
say
number.
spoiled? I didn't say spoiled.
Okay, what I feel like this conversation isn't going anywhere. Let's talk about cryptocurrencies.
Well, no, I mean, so the purpose of this show is I take cryptocurrency and break it down to an ethical and moral way of how does it actually work, because we're using a lot of systems in cryptocurrency, and you and I have talked about Bitcoin, we've talked about other ideas, and saying, can we take these real world ways of doing things and make them work with cryptocurrency? And then but my question to
I
a lot of
don't
these
I
people.
don't I don't even know if I agree with that. Like cryptocurrencies are meant to do one thing. They're meant to be hard money. Money is a technology, and cryptocurrencies are an iteration on this technology to create a better hard money.
Yeah, but it has to work. It has to function through governance, in like some kind of governance, or else it falls apart.
Right. And that's where we get back to just the very basics of skin in the game based governance.
Yeah, so that's where you and I are disagreeing about. Is
And
you
I'm
think skin in
basically
the
saying,
game? You think skin in the game is going to work, and I'm saying here are examples in the real world of it not working.
I'm saying if you don't think that skin in the game governance is what created the modern world, I don't think we're going to agree about anything.
That's fine. I didn't say that. I said this is how it's easily manipulated. And we're living in a perfect example of it. Over the last 40 years, it was manipulated.
Easily manipulated, though. Propose a system that is better than skin in the game governance for value creation. You're using these words like it's easily manipulated, and that's just not true. You're using nitpicky examples to try and prove a point, and it's just not.
I don't understand why you keep saying nitpicky. I mean,
because we're talking about very broad topics like capitalism in general, and then you're using one specific example from like Amazon or something like that to say that the whole system is terrible and can be manipulated. And it's just not true. From a top level perspective, the world has been getting dramatically better over the years. And this is mostly due to the effects of capitalism.
Well, I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about specifically America, just because I don't want to get too broad.
Right. So there goes the nitpick part, right? You're trying to nitpick specific examples of things not working out when a very broad sense, the best way to ensure positive outcomes is capitalism, is skin in the game based governance, is incentivizing value creation.
Yeah, but when you're trying to look at how to use an attack vector, you start nitpicking. You don't look at broad.
How can you use this attack vector that you said has been applied to America? How can you use it on Decred very specifically?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. That's my point. I'm asking you, can this happen? And you're saying no. I don't know
what attack vector you're talking about. Be very specific. How would this attack work on Decred? What would you do specifically?
That's the question that I'm trying to pose to you as somebody who doesn't know a ton about Decred. So what I'm saying is that this is what's happening in America right now, right? Over the last 50 years, people have voted against their self-interest to allow infrastructure in this country to completely collapse. For the first time in the history of this country, life expectancy is actually decreasing.
You're using hyperbolic language to make
how is that hyperbolic?
Because you're saying that the infrastructure in America is collapsed. Like, dude, are you?
I didn't say it's collapsed. I said it's collapsing. We have a great system.
Run the tape back.
We have a rating system in this country for our infrastructure, and it's been slowly degrading because we haven't been investing in our infrastructure. We haven't been investing in roads and bridges. Our bridges are, the majority of our bridges are like rated like at a D+ or a C- right now, just because we haven't been investing in infrastructure.
You're trying to use democracy, governance of a society, and take lessons from that and apply it to skin in the game based governance. Those are two very separate types of governments that have very separate goals. A governance of a society, the goal is to allow people to live amongst each other without fighting, and to basically not allow a plutocracy to form where you have the entire society controlled by the rich, because that allows them to set the rules in their favor and offload risk that they're taking onto the general population. Right now, that is a very different type of governance system than what we're talking about with skin in the game based governments. Allocating decision making authority.
I'm using you a little bit. Can you?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
I keep
thank you.
moving
That's
away.
okay.
That is a very different governance system than skin in the game. A governance system that is designed to incentivize value creation. Right? You have one that's designed to allow people to live amongst one another peacefully. One that's designed to incentivize value creation, to allow people to collaborate and create value in the world. You cannot take specific scenarios from a society-based governance system and try to apply them to a skin in the game based governance system. If you want to take examples from previous cryptocurrency attacks, from even previous attacks against maybe like corporations or things like that, then I am totally open to talking about those. But we're
Well, I
not
did
going to
that with
get
Bitcoin, and
anywhere.
you didn't want to talk about that. I said,
Which one? Let's talk about that. Which one?
Well, so there's minor centralization, which you said that's the
We
hybrid
talked about
system
that.
that you guys are employing for that reason. But proof of stake. I guess you have centralization. It happened with Stellar. They shut that. The idea. See, that's the thing. I'm not prepared for that kind of situation, and I don't want to get too in the weeds of that. So I was talking about just more of like you brought up some points, and that was the first instinct that I had about when you said skin in the game and people are going to be rational. That's an assumption. That's
not an assumption. If you want to design a system where on a large scale people are rational, you design it to be based on skin in the game. That is the best way and the only way that as humans we have found to ensure the best way to ensure positive outcomes.
And I disagree, because if there is any kind of financial reward available to people will manipulate the system to try to get as much of that financial reward as possible.
If you're taking risk, then you should be compensated for that risk you're taking. If you're using the government to create regulatory capture, that's the issue. That's where capitalism goes askew, and that's what we have to try and prevent, right? But taking risk and providing a financial incentive for somebody is not bad. It's good. It's very good, because it allows it is what has led to the world we live in today.
Well, you're saying that immediate risk is better than long-term risk, and that's where I'm disagreeing with you on. If you're giving somebody an immediate reward for something, people are going to try to manipulate that, that's just human nature.
Provide an example. I'm not following.
So, okay. So the difference between Bitcoin and, let's just say, Nano, because I've talked about Nano on the show. A Nano person is actually who asked me to have you come on. So that's like, because those two cryptocurrencies are so fundamentally different, I try to use those as an example. So Bitcoin is about short-term gain by trying to win in the mining race and get the reward, right? And so you have an incentive to do everything you possibly can to manipulate the system to get as much power as possible, to get as much of the short-term reward as possible.
What's an example?
What do you mean?
What's an example of that you just said, of using the system to try and manipulating the system to try and maximize short-term gain?
Finding out that there isn't a block against ASICs, and while everybody else is using GPUs, starting to create ASICs and now having ASIC farms all over the world, and now nobody can really use a laptop to mine Bitcoin anymore.
But that's not manipulating the system. That's the system working as intended, right? It's creating more computational resources to secure the network. That adds security to the network.
Well, unless ASICs were in the white paper and ASICs were something that he was aware of, then that's not part of the system. The system, I mean, in my mind, the system is when you design something, what you have in mind.
The system is not the white paper. The white paper was the seed that the system grew out of, but what we know now far surpasses what was known back when the white paper was written, right? Like the two things, like you said, Satoshi did not anticipate ASICs. That was a very big thing missing from the white paper, but those evolved organically, and that's not manipulation of the system. That's just the system growing and evolving and maturing over time.
Okay, I mean that's okay. I mean I'll accept that that's your opinion on it. I disagree, because all of a sudden you're pricing out the vast majority of the world to be able to compete with you.
Yeah, but these are
And so,
designed to be run in adversarial environments. Like you're not, if you can't handle ASICs developing, then the system is not worth anything. If you can't run the system in an adversarial environment where everybody is trying to break it in every way possible and trying to maximize their own gains, and if your system doesn't work because of that, then it's not a good cryptocurrency. It's not worth anything. The reason cryptocurrencies are valuable is because they were designed to be able to be run and work in these very adversarial environments. And the game theory, the way the game theory works, it actually the development of ASICs strengthened the Bitcoin network. It added value to the Bitcoin network because it made it harder to attack.
I mean, I disagree in the sense of it made it more centralized, and so it's a whole different attack, like a source of potential failure. But that's okay. We can disagree on that. I don't disagree with you on just needing to be adversarial, because you absolutely have to be adversarial. And I said to Nano all the time, you're never going to really understand if this thing works until you get enough of a social awareness of it that people start to attack it to make sure it actually works and can hold up over time. So I 100% agree with you on that aspect. I'm just saying that that's not, Bitcoin went the route of, we're just going to let anybody do anything. And we're going to let it evolve in any way it possibly can. And if somebody wants to try to manipulate the system and find a loophole and do that, whatever, we'll let them do everything. And that's going to be our source of security. Whereas Nano went the other route and they said, there is no immediate reward. The reward is, if by you participating in the system, the reward is a safer system. And you have to be socially mindful of that's better long term.
How so?
Potentially. Well, because you have people who are getting involved and paying money because they want to see the system be safe and secure. That's the only reason they're doing it. They're not doing it because they're getting an immediate financial reward from it.
How does that work? How does that work in Nano?
In what sense? Like how is it working, or what are the fundamentals?
I just need an example to help connect the dots.
Okay, so like you and me would both. Let's say you and me run businesses, and we don't want somebody else to have a representative node confirming, being the person confirming our transactions. You and I both want to be our own security, so we both run a node. We're not getting any financial reward of running a node. We don't get there aren't blocks being mined. There aren't. It's not proof of stake. There is no immediate financial reward. We get literally 0 nano for running a node. But if we're doing transactions on a daily basis for our businesses, it's much more. It's better for us to be running our own nodes in our businesses, just because it's more secure, it's more stable, and then also, but we're not passing that. We're not passing the voting weight onto somebody else.
Real quick. Is that not the same logic for Bitcoin, though? Why is that specific to Nano? Like a Bitcoin business running their own node gets the same exact thing.
I'm not talking about nodes. I'm talking about mining, because mining is how that's how the system kind of functions. And you actually said like node people don't really have any power.
They don't have any recourse. They don't have any leverage, essentially, besides pointing their node at a different implementation, which theoretically takes business away from the miners and the economic nodes. But in practice, I think it's just a very weak mechanism.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, I don't think I know there was this big kick on Twitter last year that people running nodes have all this power in the Bitcoin space, and I just didn't see it. I'm like, okay, if you say so. I mean,
well, it's more about, okay, what if those other three groups, the devs, the miners, and the economic nodes, do something that you don't like, what recourse do you have? And you really don't have any recourse, right?
Exactly.
Like
miners,
power. Miners can stop, adding blocks to the blockchain, right? Every other group has recourse except for the full nodes. They're just they allow you to validate your own transactions, but they don't provide a lot of leverage in implementing changes.
Yeah. And so in Nano's situation, where 100% of the cryptocurrency has already been created through CAPTCHAs, there is no economic resource to running the node, like immediate. I'm talking about immediate. Now, long term, you're helping build out the infrastructure. You're helping secure the infrastructure. You're doing all this stuff long term. It's like laying the foundation of your house. There isn't any immediate benefit to it because you can't actually sleep in your house. But if you spend all this time building a really solid infrastructure, a really solid base to build the house on top of, it's going to be better long term. So that's, in my mind, when people run nodes in Nano, that's what they're thinking of. They're thinking of, I am laying down a solid foundation to build my house on top of so it doesn't sink, so it doesn't fall apart at the first rain or whatever like that. Versus people who are mining Bitcoin, they're like, I don't care about 2 weeks from now. I'm trying to get the Bitcoin right this second. I'm doing everything I possibly can to get the financial incentive reward right this second. And a lot of them don't, in my mind, don't necessarily think about the long-term viability or stability of Bitcoin.
But that's why, right? That's why it's important to give the coin holders actual leverage in the equation, because the coin holders are the ones that are going to have more of the long-term interest of the project at heart, whereas miners are much more, it's much more profit motivated. Like, some miners, sure, will treat cryptocurrencies as an investment, but a lot of them, it's just very commoditized, where you mine to earn a profit, and that is the business in itself. You're not necessarily a long-term holder.
Okay, so I mean, I agree with you on that. I agree with you on the theory of that. It'll be I'm interested to see how that works out, like over the course of 20 years, just because, like I said, I've seen people do irrational things in the guise of, I can make an extra 1% profit somehow and manipulate the system. But I think this is one of those things where it's like it's a theoretical conversation. I don't want to get bogged down, and thank you for humoring it for so long. Talk to me about voting in general, because I know you guys have been doing something in Brazil with actual physical voting, and I think that's kind of part of the thing that kind of got me a little confused about what Decred's trying to do or be, is when I saw you guys using Decred to help secure.
So that wasn't like, that's not a primary goal of Decred. That was basically a community member taking things that we've built for Decred governance and applying them to a real world situation where it can add value. But that's not like Decred, the project itself is not focused on that. It's an ancillary benefit of just what we've built for ourselves to govern ourselves has a bunch of applications in the real world, and people can take it and use those, the technology we built, and apply them to all different kinds of stuff.
So do you want to talk about it, or do you not?
Sure. We can get into voting for allocating the Treasury funds, because that's basically what it uses, the same mechanism as the Brazilian voting. And basically, like I said, we don't want to lead to block. We keep as much data off the blockchain as we can. And so things like voting for, allocating funds, then that is all done off chain, and it's time stamped onto the Decred blockchain. Meaning, a timestamp is essentially a way to take data and you hash it down. A cryptographic hash function takes a variable amount of input data and then creates a fixed length output. So, right, you can hash down an entire book into basically a small string of alphanumeric characters, right?
It's like a zip file.
Yes and no. It's not compression, meaning you can't take the output and figure out what the input is, but that same input will result in the same output every time. If even a single byte is changed in the input, a single period, a single character, then the output is totally separate, uncorrelated, right? And so what you can do with this is you can basically hash data down and put it into what's called a Merkle tree, which is basically, let's say I have 2 books. I take the hash of one book and then the hash of the other book, combine them, and hash that again. And so basically you can take a near infinite amount of data and hash it down to a very small just string of alphanumeric characters. Now, you can't go the other way, like I said, but what you do is, if you include, it's called a Merkle root, that single hash that represents all that data, and you include it in a Decred transaction, you're time stamping that data onto the blockchain, meaning I can then take that same book and recreate that same hash, and I can prove cryptographically that it is included in that Decred transaction. So it
Gotcha.
doesn't.
Okay.
So it allows you to prove data existed at a certain block height, right?
Gotcha.
And the data has not been altered since then.
So what you're saying is, if I have a time to kill, and I have Romeo and Juliet, and I hash them both down, I can prove with that hash that this one was on the chain and this one wasn't. That a time to kill was on it, and Romeo and Juliet
and
was
you
not.
can you basically can prove that time to kill existed at block height, 1,000 or whatever. Okay. So with the voting, the way this comes in, and this is what we do with our Treasury allocation voting, and this is what they did in Brazil, is you timestamp all of the votes onto the blockchain. So if somebody wanted to go back after the fact and try and manipulate the data, it immediately throws up red flags because you can detect that. You can detect that, the data is not the same. Something happened to it. Yeah. You don't know what happened to it. You just know that it's not the same. And so a lot of, especially like early on from 2017, a lot of people were talking about like private blockchains. What they really wanted was basically the ability to prove that data existed, because storing data on a blockchain is expensive. It's more expensive than storing it in a centralized database, right? But if you store the data in a centralized database and then just have a timestamp on the blockchain itself, you can still prove that the data has remained the same since it was timestamped on the blockchain, but you don't actually have to store the data itself on the blockchain.
And so if you manipulate the data in the centralized server,
it will be different.
And then you try to hash it down. People can say, "Oh, that's not the same hash.
It's not the same thing." Yeah, exactly. It's different.
Okay. That's pretty. So is that essentially the Lightning Network?
No, that's very unrelated.
I mean, just in the sense of like the fundamental, because I was talking with Daniel Goldman about this with Ethereum layer 2, and they're just doing a bunch of stuff and then only kind of once in a while pinging layer 1 and taking like essentially like that hash or a zip file or whatever, but it can't be like done the other way.
So no, it's the Lightning. Okay, you can think of the Lightning Network in layer 2 as doing a single transaction to move cryptocurrency onto the layer 2, and then you can do a bunch of transactions. You can do 10,000 transactions on layer 2 in a more centralized manner, but where you can have instant confirmations. You don't have to wait for block confirmations. And
speak into the microphone.
Sorry, you can have instant confirmations, and then so it's more centralized, but it adds speed, transaction processing power, and then when you're done, it results in one final transaction on the blockchain to move it back out of the Lightning Network. So it's a very different concept, but it's a way to add leverage to a system essentially. Whereas like time stamping allows you to timestamp an unlimited amount of data onto the blockchain and prove it existed, and layer 2 solutions allow you to increase the number of transactions without creating data on chain.
But then eventually that data gets shrunk down and put on chain.
No. So imagine like you have the input into the Lightning Network, a bunch of stuff happens, you don't really care about stuff, and then you have the output, right? And so let's say the input is just one person, and the output might end up splitting those funds to a bunch of different people because the intermediate transactions ended up splitting those funds up all over the place.
Sure, but then eventually something gets written to the layer 1, right?
Yes, but you're not compressing data. Okay. I think the terminology you used just threw me off because it has a specific meaning.
Because when I said zip file, Daniel was like, "Yeah, absolutely, zip file." And so that's why I guess I'm a little confused because like both of you are saying different things now, and so now I'm trying to figure out.
It's just more of a like in the context like a zip file. Like when you zip something, you're compressing it, right? You can compress it and then you can decompress it, and when you decompress it, it results in the exact same thing that you input.
Yeah, no,
right?
yeah. I mean, you're saying you can't decompress it, so he might have just been like saying yes to that as an example of how to compress something and then put it on. So he may not have said, yeah. So I understand that you can't uncompress it,
right?
Or
but even so, like with Lightning Network, what you're talking about, like the input that you like when you pull the money out of the light or the cryptocurrency out of the Lightning Network, it's going to result in, it's not, the owners of the output are going to be different than the owners in the input. Like there's no, you don't go back to the original input, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So they're not trying to necessarily secure Brazilian elections with Decred, but it's more of just kind of like a way of proving if something did get manipulated.
Yeah. So in a way that is right. They're trying to secure Brazilian elections using timestamping. They're just using what we've built already and just repurposing it for timestamping for votes, like election votes, instead of, Decred ticket votes for proposal allocations.
I mean, is anybody else doing this? Because everyone I've heard talk about voting on the blockchain is like, don't do it. It's the worst possible idea. But the way you're talking about it seems like a pretty good idea.
Well, you've got to distinguish between voting on the blockchain and then just using something like timestamping to verify that a vote has not been manipulated, right? Voting on the blockchain, like, for example, when we do hard fork votes, that is actually voting on the blockchain where the vote is stored on the blockchain. But in a democracy context, people who say that voting using the blockchain is bad, I think they're really just talking about like people not being able to secure their private keys. Like they're talking about cryptographically verifiable voting. Just take the blockchain totally out of it. You don't need a blockchain for cryptographically verifiable voting, right?
Yeah.
Your cryptographically verifiable voting is basically somebody has a key, they sign their vote with the key to be able to cryptographically prove that this was their vote, and then they submit their vote, right? And then you can tie a vote back to a specific person and cryptographically prove that they were the ones that cast it because they signed it using their key, right? So Decred does this all the time. And it works fine. It works great. The reason that most people might not think it's a good idea for the broader population is mostly because of teaching people how to store keys properly is a very difficult problem. But I think I think that cryptographically verifiable voting absolutely makes sense on a governance level, whether that's like a local government or something like a nation state. The tools to facilitate that have to be developed, but that's where things will eventually head. I think countries, maybe even like Estonia, might even be experimenting with it now.
Yeah, I've heard about them doing it. So can I ask you a question about the wallet?
Sure.
So I was talking to somebody from another wallet that isn't associated with any one blockchain, and I'm on their like helper list, Telegram of like suggestions and this and that. And I actually I told them to check out Decred because from a fundamental level on the opening of the wallet, it's really good in the sense of like assuming that the person doesn't know anything about cryptocurrency. And I love that. So listeners, if you have a chance to download Decredition, is that right?
Decrediton. It's named after a graviton. But
see, I'm adding an I where there is no I. Decrediton. If you have a chance to download that, to take a look, because in my mind of like, if I was sending, I try to just use an example of my mom, who's a senior citizen now. Would she be able to understand that process? So I love the opening where it kind of explains everything. But then I kind of got to the point where I had your coworker send me a tiny bit of Decred, and then I couldn't figure out how to send it back to her. So it's like, do you guys talk about, is Decrediton like an autonomous third-party app, or is it like Decred's app, or like how does that work?
Well, it's all open source. So it's anybody can, take the Decrediton code, use it for their own purposes, repurpose it, whatever. But it was paid for by the network treasury, right? And this is a big benefit of having a network treasury, is that traditionally in like Bitcoin, you don't necessarily, especially early on, you didn't have wallets with very good UX, because in order to develop one, in order to get it paid for, you'd have to have a business that then funded like a wallet company, and then that business has to be able to have a business model that is profitable for a wallet. We don't have to worry about having a profitable business model because we have the network treasury to fund that type of stuff. Like the way Decred benefits from it is that it increases Decred adoption, which increases the Decred price, which increases the network treasury, right? So you don't have to have a profit-driven business behind these different development efforts. And that very much influences the overall end result of the product, because a lot of products might have, things that aren't the best for user experience, but are necessary for the business model. Just look at the web and ads. Whereas Decred, the incentives are to provide the best experience for the user in order to get them to use the Decred network and to become a Decred community member, essentially.
So I guess my question for that is, and I know the answer off the top, like what I say, but just go with me on this. Who's the one deciding where the funds go? And
Right.
obviously, it's the 60% of the people staking, right?
Yeah, so we have a proposal system. It is a website. It's based on all that timestamping technology that we just talked about. Okay. And if you have a development team, then you'll go and you'll write up a proposal for funding for a roadmap, and then the stakeholders vote on which teams to fund. And so the Decrediton team is a specific team that works on that Decrediton wallet, but it's not owned by anybody. It's open source. So the code can be freely used by anything. Everything developed by Decred is open source. That's why you see things like the Decred voting system being used, or timestamping system being used in the Brazilian elections, because the code is available for anyone to repurpose and use for their own specific use case.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool. So you don't necessarily have the danger. I mean, you might, obviously there's always going to be some danger, but you don't have the danger of, I guess, like my thing is, like, once I got into the app, if I can't figure out how to send back, that tiny bit of Decred that your coworker gave me, like, right. my mom never would. And I'm looking at it now. So I guess the problem, the issue I face is, if you have a bunch of people who own Decred and have been using it for a long time, making the decisions, they're already competent in the space and may not be thinking about it from, a person who's never getting into crypto for the first time. So I guess, like,
right. I mean, that's a UX problem in general, though, with any product, right? The people too close to it a lot of times can't see, what is obvious and what is not obvious. And cryptocurrency in general has traditionally had a very rough UX, but over time it continually keeps getting better and better and better as the industry matures.
Yeah, but I guess from like a non-governance standpoint, like a non-Decred governance standpoint, anybody can just do it and then put it out there and potentially make immediate money on it by selling it for $1 or $2 if they want. But that's not. Is that possible with you guys? Or they just wouldn't be able to get funds from the governance system that way, like from the Treasury, if they went that route.
It just depends on the specific context of the proposal. Like, it's up to the stakeholders whether they want to approve something like that or not. I can't really say. The only thing I can say is that as of right now, all the Decred code is open source, and the fact that we don't have to be profit motivated is one of the big benefits, because it aligns incentives. But if, like, some entity wanted to come along and take the Decrediton wallet or repurpose it or sell it or whatever, it's open source code.
Nice. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about really fast, like, how much time do you have? Do you have time for another question?
Yeah, I got time. I think we got one more question would be good. My headphones are actually about to die.
Okay, sweet. Lightning transactions.
Yes.
So this show is notorious for talking shit about Lightning Network, just because it's like 80% of the time it works 100% of the time. But you're saying on the website that you use Lightning Network. So I guess
we have a Decred Lightning Network. It is actually cross-chain compatible with the Bitcoin Lightning Network. You can pay Bitcoin Lightning Network invoices using your Decred Lightning Network wallet, and the wallet functionality is all built into Decrediton, the desktop wallet, for the other on-chain transactions and everything else.
So if Bitcoin's Lightning Network doesn't work all the time, and their devs still say more or less it's not, like, you shouldn't trust it for it to work every single time, how is yours working out?
Well, ours is a function of the Bitcoin Lightning Network, right? So the Lightning Network is it's a protocol, and in a protocol you have a protocol specification that is written out in plain English, and then devs will take that protocol specification and implement it in a specific programming language, turn it into code. So the Decred Lightning Network uses the same protocol specification as the Bitcoin Lightning Network. We use a lot of the same code as the Bitcoin Lightning Network because it's open source. So a lot of the changes that they do, we just pull in, and there's there's tweaks that we have to make to tailor it towards Decred, but it's cross compatible with Bitcoin. So our Lightning Network is very much a function of the Bitcoin Lightning Network because that's where the main source of funding for Lightning development is. And just in general, though, the Lightning Network is still a very immature technology, which is why it's not going to be 100% reliable yet. I mean, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong decision long term, right? Scaling on chain is not possible. Trying to increase transaction capacity on chain is, from a engineering standpoint, is the wrong long-term decision. So yes, it's taking the Lightning Network, a while to get up and running, but it's just a technology that is maturing. Like, you're trying to bootstrap this entire second layer network, and it just takes time and a lot of engineering work.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to work, or that I just, people say it's the future, and I've never seen it work
I think
yet.
my headphones died. I can't hear anything. Hold on one second.
Oh, shit. Okay.